Hey YouTube, JoelBoy here. So today I have an interesting topic that honestly I skipped over during the Zoe arc and should have been covered there, but is going to be covered now. And something that I feel like should be an obvious conclusion for a lot of people to discuss, but I really haven't seen anyone put these two dots together, so I felt like finally doing it in this video today. So in this video I want to talk about Zunisha, the elephant which carries the island of Zoe. I want to talk about Momonosuke's power, which we saw that he has control over Zunisha in some way, and that this is unique. And then I also want to talk about where Zunisha is going, and a connection that we made in the past when we first saw the island of Zoe in the first place. So without further ado, let's get right into this. So I think it's important to begin here, but Momonosuke has a power, and this power is a big deal. I've gone so far as to speculate that this is the actual power of Uranus, but it doesn't have to be Uranus, but definitely this is a unique power which is going to have some role in the future of One Piece, in my opinion. We know for a fact that nobody else can do what Momonosuke can do. I see this repeated often. I guess there's some confusion within the community saying that, you know, Luffy could have controlled Zunisha, but he just chose not to because he wanted Momonosuke to do it to sort of fulfill his role as sort of the leader of the samurai, and that isn't the case whatsoever. Luffy specifically said that he could not control the elephant. He could not speak to it, he could only hear it. And the implication behind the scene isn't, well, I can't speak to it because, you know, I want you to speak to it. It's, I can't speak to it because literally my voice won't reach Zunisha. And it's even commented on during this scene that both Momonosuke's father, Oden, and Roger could also hear Zunisha, but could not speak to the creature, that they repeated these same exact words that Luffy said. And it's highly emphasized that Zunisha couldn't actually defend itself without a specific order from Momonosuke. We also learned during this chapter that in the past, probably the Void Century, there was a person with most probably the same power as Momonosuke who sort of forced Zunisha to walk the world forever as a punishment for something that she did in the past. And that due to this order, she couldn't actually defend herself or the island of Zoe. But she really wanted to defend herself from Jack and the people that were on her. And so because of this, she needed another order to break the initial order that she received sometime in the distant past. And so based on this information, I think it's very clear that Momonosuke has a very important ability that relates to being able to control the elephant Zunisha, and then could also be used to control other creatures as well, potentially other elephants. Zunisha can't be the only one of her kind, that doesn't seem likely, or just different creatures as well that are similar to Zunisha. And I think this is further emphasized by the fact that at the end of the Zoe arc, Momonosuke stayed behind with Inarashi to figure out better how his powers work. He wants to have another conversation with Zunisha, which I think implies and foreshadows the fact that this isn't the last time that we've seen, or we're going to see, Momonosuke use this power. And so why this is so cool is that, as I speculated way back in the past, and I've speculated just now, there should be other elephants as well, just like Zunisha. Zunisha can't be the only one of her kind, or it seems really unlikely for that to be the case, especially given the context that elephants normally travel in herds. You hardly ever find an elephant by itself, and if you do, they're easy prey for lions, or I guess in this case, woolly mammoths. But there should be other elephants somewhere in the world, and people actually noticed this way back at the beginning of the Zoe arc, and I honestly forgot about it until a couple weeks ago. But there's already been speculation as to the idea that we've already seen the rest of Zunisha's herd. And this is actually one of the biggest mysteries of One Piece that has potentially been figured out, which is that way back in the Florian Triangle arc, at the very end of the Thriller Bark arc, chapter 490, we meet the menacing giant denizens of the fog of the Florian Triangle. They're definitely creatures, they're definitely huge, and this was just huge foreshadowing way back when, and for a while we didn't know what these creatures were, but this is just typical of the kind of foreshadowing of something important that will be revealed later in the story. And so I think that these creatures that were in the Florian Triangle's fog are in fact other giant elephants just like Zunisha, the rest of Zunisha's herd. This was speculated by a lot of people, Boris Anime, Anime Fan Talk, a lot of people on the forums as well, and just after this point, just completely forgotten about. I haven't seen it brought up again after that point in time, but I think this connection is even more important now, given the context that Momonosuke potentially has a power over these creatures. And so some of you might be wondering, okay, so what's all the evidence that really substantiates the idea that these are giant elephants and not something else? And the main clue that we have is, first of all, they appear to be huge. They're definitely creatures because we see their eyes. And then also we see that they're within the Florian Triangle, which is, oddly enough, a very foggy place. And then going into Zunisha, what's also interesting is around Zunisha is also a dense fog that seems to be following Zunisha wherever she goes. So I honestly think that it's highly possible that Zunisha produces somehow the fog around her, and that would also apply to other members of her herd. And then given that there's even more of these elephants, at least 3 within the Florian Triangle, this would explain why the fog in the Florian Triangle is so huge, and encompasses a lot more area than just the fog surrounding Zunisha. There's just more elephants there. And so some of you might be wondering why it is that these elephants that are in the Florian Triangle haven't been discovered. And so my answer to this is actually pretty simple. First of all, the Florian Triangle is a place where ships go to die, and is often avoided by sailors and pirates, etc. And even if they don't avoid it, then they don't usually come out of it. So then they can't really report stories of having seen giant elephants. We also learn during the Zou arc, the beginning of the Zou arc, that there's actually a current that pushes ships away from Zunisha. As you get closer to Zunisha, you actually get pushed away, so you have to directly go towards her. So then if there's a bunch of these elephants within the Florian Triangle, and the fog is so dense that you can't see through it very well, and you don't really know exactly where you're going, then naturally the currents are going to push you away from the elephants, or around them, or whatever. And so then it's pretty easy to avoid these giant elephants, even if you manage to go in the Florian Triangle and then escape later on. So if you haven't noticed, I'm pretty convinced that these denizens of the Florian Triangle are in fact elephants, and so I think that this could legitimately be something Momonosuke learns from Zunisha during his conversation that he's supposedly going to have with Zunisha in the future, which is that she has a herd, she has a pact that exists on the other side of the Grand Line. And so this could possibly explain how Momonosuke in the future learns of these other elephants' existence and potentially uses them in some arc in the future through his ability to in some way command them. But I think some of you might be questioning right now that this is in fact Zunisha's herd, and that they could be elephants, but they may not be related to Zunisha in any way, because the biggest obstacle that we would need to overcome is the red line itself. How would Zunisha get across the red line in the first place? Because she's in the New World. These other elephants are in the Florian Triangle, which is in the Paradise section, and so in order for Zunisha to originally be a part of them, but then somehow end up in the New World, she would have had to cross the red line, and that frankly seems impossible. And so how could this have happened? Well, I think the most interesting possibility to explain this is the idea that Zunisha is 1,000 years old, right? So she is ancient. I think it's possible that in the past the red line never even existed in the first place. So this could potentially explain how Zunisha was separated from these other elephants. If the red line was somehow created during the Void Century, then that would be the easiest explanation to explain why these elephants might have originally been part of the same group, but now are separated by this huge uncrossable barrier. And I think there's also a good amount of foreshadowing that the red line is something that needs to be destroyed in One Piece. I'll cover this in a future theory because it really is a big deal. And so I'm not going to get into all the specific evidence, but there's definitely clues out there that the red line needs to be destroyed. And probably the biggest of all these is that the All Blue is a myth, but at some point it has to be realized because it's Sanji's dream. And the red line itself prevents the existence of the All Blue because it separates the seas. And so in order for the All Blue to be created, it would seem like the simplest answer to do this would be to destroy the red line. And if the Red Line didn't always exist in the world of One Piece, it would explain the myth of the All Blue in the first place, which is that this landmass didn't always exist, and at some point in time there was an area that connected all the various seas of One Piece. In fact, it wouldn't have been various seas of One Piece, it would have just been one sea. And so all this information also might reveal where Zunisha is going. There were some hints at the end of the Zou arc where a random mink sort of asks Zunisha, where exactly are you going? And I think a good answer for this is to return back to her herd. Now, of course, there's this order from long ago that basically she should walk the world forever. And so with this being said, it would seem unlikely that that order was for her to return back to her herd. But remember that their order that Zunisha had was that she can do nothing but walk the world for all eternity. So she's not being led to go anywhere by this ancient order that she received. So with this being said, she can go wherever she wants to do, but she can only act at the behest of a command in regards to everything else. So it's very possible she would just like to return home. But of course she still can't do that until the Red Line is destroyed, because the Red Line is an incrossable barrier that prevents this. And so another really interesting speculation that can be derived off of this is that, keep in mind that the minks have been living on top of Zunisha for 1,000 years. So 1,000 years possibly dates back to the time in which Zunisha was actually with the rest of her herd. And so what's interesting about this is that we see different races in the world of One Piece, but I think a lot of people often confuse races for the actual tribes, which is that the Tontatta are dwarves, but Tontatta, not every dwarf is a Tontatta. Tontatta is a specific dwarf village. The same applies to the giants of Elbaf. There are other giants out there that are not giants of Elbaf. Elbaf is just a specific island with giants on them. It's a giant tribe, I guess. But there's other giants as well. Jaguar di Sol is a giant of a different tribe other than the Elbaf giants. And so what's interesting about this is that we only have really evidence that there's minks existing on Zou. And that's it. There's no other minks in any other part of the world, especially given the context that even in Big Mom's Totland, the only minks that are there seem to be other minks that were originally on Zou. So is Zou the only place where minks exist, or are there other potential places where we could find minks? And I think a possible answer to this is that maybe the other minks are in the Florian Triangle on top of these other elephants that are part of Zunisha's herd. And so why haven't we heard about these other mink tribes that exist on these other elephants? Well, because minks naturally seclude themselves from the world. And then also existing within the Florian Triangle prevents people from encountering them or the elephants that they live on top of. And so with this being said, it's possible that they just have their own communities completely isolated from the rest of the world, whereas Zunisha traveling by herself is much more accessible than these other groups within the Florian Triangle, and thus are more readily likely to leave Zunisha and or be discovered by travelers. And so with this being said, it's possible that these minks are the actual reason why many ships go missing when they enter the Florian Triangle. But yeah, guys, I think that's enough speculation for today. Let me know what you think about this. Let me know if you like any of the conclusions that I came to within this theory, or have any reasons to potentially dismiss any of the theories that I mentioned. Let me know what you think. Like the video if you like anything that I discussed. I would appreciate it if you subscribed. And as always, dudes, have a wonderful day.